The thunderclap that shook Natalie O'Hara's entire world came not from the sky, but from the mouth of her father as he announced her imminent marriage to the town's wealthiest banker, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and colder hands. It was 1876 in the dusty frontier town of Redemption, Colorado, and at 20 years old, Natalie had long since learned that a woman's opinions were valued about as highly as last season's almanac. "This isn't a discussion, Natalie," her father declared, mustache twitching with frustration. "The arrangements have been made. Your pride has kept you unmarried far too long, and Mr. Worthington has generously overlooked your reputation." Natalie stiffened, chin rising. "My reputation for what, father? For refusing to simper and curtsy to every man who offers me a glass of punch. For suggesting that perhaps I might wish to own property someday instead of being property." Her father's face darkened. "That's exactly the kind of talk that has the whole town calling you too proud. You'll marry Worthington in 2 weeks' time, and that's final." That night, Natalie packed a small satchel with her most practical belongings. A change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, and the $37 she'd secretly saved from selling her embroidery. She slipped out just before dawn, leaving behind a brief note explaining that she would rather face the wilds of the frontier than surrender her soul to a loveless marriage. The stagecoach was departing as she reached the station, breathless and desperate. Without hesitation, she paid for passage to Silver Creek, the next town over, nearly 60 miles west. As the coach lurched forward, Natalie caught one last glimpse of Redemption's church spire and felt something between terror and exhilaration flood her veins. Running from something, miss? Asked a weathered woman across from her, eyes sharp but not unkind. Towards something, Natalie corrected. Though she had no idea what that something might be, the journey was rough, the coach jostling over rutted trails and rocky passes. By midday, disaster struck when one of the wheels shattered on a particularly treacherous stretch of road. The driver announced they were still 20 miles from Silver Creek. "We'll have to wait for the next eastbound coach," he explained grimly. "Could be tomorrow, could be 3 days." The other passengers groaned, but Natalie felt panic rising in her chest. Her father would surely send men after her, and being stranded meant certain capture. She approached the driver privately. "Is there any settlement nearby at all?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just the Rocking J Ranch, about 5 miles north," he replied. "Owner's name is Jackson Grayson, not the most sociable fellow, but decent enough." Natalie made her decision quickly. 5 miles on foot was daunting but not impossible. She gathered her satchel, ignored the warnings about traveling alone, and set out toward the north, following the driver's vague directions. The sun beat down mercilessly as she trudged across the open landscape. Her city boots, never intended for such a journey, rubbed painful blisters on her heels. Still, Natalie pressed on, reminding herself that discomfort was preferable to captivity. 3 hours into her journey, the landscape seemingly unchanged, Natalie began to fear she had made a terrible mistake. Her water was nearly gone, and the afternoon heat had become oppressive. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she crested a small rise and saw it a sprawling ranch house nestled among cottonwoods, with corrals and outbuildings spread across the valley floor. Relief made her careless, and as she hurried down the slope, her foot caught on a hidden rock. Natalie tumbled forward, crying out as she fell hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. Pain shot up her leg, and she bit her lip to keep from sobbing. After catching her breath, she tried to stand, only to collapse again. "Don't move, madam. That looks like a bad sprain." The deep voice startled her. Natalie looked up to find a man on horseback silhouetted against the sky. He dismounted with fluid grace, and as he approached, she could make out his features' tanned skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, and dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a rancher, not a fancy town gentleman, and something about his direct gaze made her both uncomfortable and strangely reassured. Jackson Grayson, he said simply, crouching beside her to examine her ankle with surprisingly gentle hands. This is my land. Mind telling me what brings a city lady out here on foot? Natalie O'Hara, she replied, wincing as he carefully removed her boot. My stagecoach broke down. The driver said your ranch was nearby. He raised an eyebrow. That's a mighty long walk for a lady in boots like these. His tone suggested he didn't quite believe her, but he didn't press further. Can't put weight on this. I'll have to carry you to the house. Before Natalie could protest, he had gathered her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. She found herself pressed against his chest, acutely aware of his heart beating steadily beneath her cheek. My satchel, she managed to say. With a slight smile, he retrieved it, hanging it from his saddle horn before remounting, somehow managing to keep her secure in his arms. Hold tight, Miss O'Hara. We'll have you fixed up soon enough. The ride to the ranch house took less than 15 minutes, during which Natalie tried desperately to formulate a plan. She couldn't tell this stranger the truth that she was fleeing an arranged marriage, but she needed a place to stay until she could figure out her next move. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, solidly built of local stone and timber. As they approached, a woman emerged onto the porch, gray-haired, lean, with shrewd eyes that assessed Natalie instantly. Mrs. Hathaway, Jackson called, we have an injured guest. Would you prepare the spare room, please? The housekeeper nodded without comment and disappeared back inside. Jackson carried Natalie through the door, into a surprisingly comfortable home. The furnishings were simple but well made, with a few unexpected touches of refinement: a piano in one corner, bookshelves filled with volumes, and landscape paintings that spoke of educated taste. He settled her carefully on a sofa in what appeared to be his study. Mrs. Hathaway will help you get comfortable. I need to send one of my men to check on that stagecoach. Let them know you're safe. Thank you, Natalie said, suddenly feeling the enormity of her situation. I don't know how to repay your kindness. No need for that. Rest that ankle. We'll talk more at dinner. Over the next few hours, Natalie was tended to by the efficient Mrs. Hathaway, who wrapped her ankle, helped her bathe, and provided her with a simple but clean dress that must have belonged to someone else. Mr. Grayson's sister visits occasionally, the housekeeper explained when Natalie questioned the clothing. About your size, though not as tall. Dinner was served in a dining room warmed by a crackling fire. Jackson Grayson, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, helped Natalie to the table. His ranch hands ate elsewhere, he explained, as this was his private residence. So, Miss O'Hara, he said once they were seated before plates of tender beef and vegetables, my man returned from the stagecoach. Seems the passengers were all taken to Silver Creek on a passing freight wagon, all except for you. The driver was quite concerned. Natalie set down her fork. I should have left word. That was thoughtless of me, indeed. His eyes studied her face. He also mentioned something curious, said there might be people looking for a young woman matching your description from Redemption. Her heart sank. Mr. Grayson, Jackson, please, Jackson. I haven't been entirely forthcoming. I suspected as much when I found you walking across my land in city boots with a single satchel. His voice remained neutral without judgment. Are you in some kind of trouble, Miss O'Hara? Natalie considered lying, then discarded the notion. This man had shown her nothing but kindness. He deserved honesty. I'm running from an arranged marriage, she admitted. My father has promised me to a man old enough to be my grandfather, a man I will not marry. Jackson nodded slowly. And when you refused? I wasn't given the option to refuse. The wedding is in 2 weeks' time, or was supposed to be. She lifted her chin. The entire town thinks I'm too proud, too opinionated for a woman. Perhaps they're right. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, perhaps, or appreciation. Pride isn't always a fault, Miss O'Hara. Sometimes it's all that keeps us standing when the world tries to beat us down. His understanding, so unexpected, brought a sudden threat of tears. Natalie blinked them away quickly. Nevertheless, I've put you in an awkward position. If people come looking for me, let them come, he interrupted, his voice hardening slightly. This is my land. I decide who stays and who goes. You would help a stranger? Why? Jackson was silent for a moment, absently turning his water glass in slow circles. My sister, the one whose dress you're wearing, she was forced into a marriage much like the one you're describing. She didn't have the courage to run. His eyes met hers. She died in childbirth a year later, miserable and alone. I'm so sorry, Natalie whispered. He nodded his acknowledgement. You can stay here until your ankle heals. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. That night, lying in the comfortable guest bed, Natalie tried to make sense of her feelings. Relief at having found temporary sanctuary warred with anxiety about her uncertain future. And beneath it all, a strange awareness of Jackson Grayson, his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, and the pain she glimpsed behind his storm-gray eyes. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Natalie was sitting on the porch, her bandaged foot elevated, when she saw riders approaching. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized her father's foreman among them. Jackson emerged from the barn, intercepting the men before they reached the house. From her position, Natalie couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the tension in Jackson's shoulders, the way he planted himself firmly between the visitors and his home. After several minutes, the men rode away without coming closer to the house. Jackson walked slowly back, his expression unreadable. They're looking for you, he confirmed, taking a seat beside her. Your father has offered a substantial reward. Natalie's hands trembled slightly. What did you tell them? That I hadn't seen anyone matching your description. His mouth quirked in a half-smile. I may have mentioned that I heard the stagecoach passengers were all taken to Silver Creek. Relief flooded through her. You lied for me. Let's call it misdirection. He studied her face. They'll be back, though. Your father seems determined. He's always been determined to control my life, Natalie said bitterly. I'm his only child, and since my mother died, he's treated me like a possession rather than a daughter. Jackson nodded slowly. What's your plan, Natalie? You can't run forever. The use of her first name surprised her, but she found she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. I don't know, she admitted. I had thought to find work in Silver Creek, perhaps as a teacher or shopkeeper. I have some education. Silver Creek will be the first place they look, he pointed out, and a single woman seeking employment will draw attention. Natalie sighed, knowing he was right. Then I'll go further west, San Francisco perhaps. Alone, without connections or references, he shook his head. That's dangerous, even for someone not as. He hesitated. As what? Proud? Stubborn? She challenged. To her surprise, he laughed a warm, genuine sound that transformed his face. I was going to say as noticeable. You're not exactly someone who blends into a crowd, Natalie O'Hara. The compliment, if that's what it was, made her cheeks warm. Well, I can't go back. I won't. No one's suggesting you should. Jackson rose, offering her his hand. Come, your ankle needs exercise, and I want to show you something. Leaning on his arm, Natalie limped alongside him toward a small rise behind the main house. At the top stood a half-constructed building, its stone foundation complete, but its walls only partially framed. What is this? She asked. It was going to be a school. Jackson ran his hand along one of the wooden beams. I have 15 families working this ranch with nearly 30 children between them. The nearest school is in Silver Creek. Natalie looked at him with new interest. You're building a school for your workers' children, he nodded. Was building. The teacher I hired from Denver changed her mind at the last minute, something about the isolation being too much to bear. He glanced at her sideways. The position remains open. Natalie's heart beat faster as she understood his implication. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Grayson? Jackson, he corrected automatically. And yes, I suppose I am. Room and board in the main house plus a modest salary. You mentioned having an education. I attended the young ladies' seminary in St. Louis for 2 years, she said, unable to keep pride from her voice. I studied literature, mathematics, science, and history. More than qualified then. His eyes held hers. The position comes with a certain amount of protection. As my employee, you'd have a legitimate reason to be here. If your father's men return, you would go to such lengths for a stranger? Natalie asked again, echoing her question from the night before. Jackson's gaze softened. You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Natalie O'Hara. Over the next 3 weeks, as her ankle healed and summer deepened across the ranch, Natalie threw herself into preparing for her new role. Jackson provided books and supplies, and together they finished the small schoolhouse. The work was physically demanding but deeply satisfying. Each evening, they would share dinner and conversation that often stretched late into the night. Natalie learned that Jackson had inherited the ranch from his uncle 5 years earlier, transforming it from a struggling operation into one of the most successful in the territory. He'd fought briefly in the Civil War, studied at Harvard for 2 years before being called home when his parents fell ill, and harbored a secret passion for Shakespeare that made Natalie's literary heart sing. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood, her mother's gentle influence, her dreams of someday writing stories of her own. She found herself laughing more than she had in years, discovering a sense of freedom she'd never known in town. The ranch hands and their families accepted her readily, especially after Jackson introduced her as our new teacher, Miss O'Hara. The women invited her to their homes, taught her to make proper biscuits, and shared frontier wisdom she'd never learned from books. On a particularly warm evening, Jackson suggested they ride to a special spot on his property. Despite her initial nervousness around horses, Natalie had become comfortable in the saddle under his patient instruction. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily through pine forests until they emerged onto a high meadow blanketed with wildflowers. It's breathtaking, Natalie gasped, taking in the panoramic view of the valley below. Jackson helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They spread a blanket among the flowers and unpacked the simple picnic Mrs. Hathaway had prepared. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in impossible colors, Jackson turned to her. "Are you happy here, Natalie?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." "Good." He seemed to struggle with his next words. "I received word today. Your father has expanded his search. He's offering $500 for information about your whereabouts." Fear knotted in her stomach. "That's a substantial sum." "Enough to tempt even loyal men," Jackson agreed grimly. "We need to consider your options more permanently." Natalie's throat tightened. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." His answer came swiftly, vehemently. "That's the last thing I want." Something in his tone made her heart race. "What are you suggesting, then?" Jackson took a deep breath. "There's a circuit judge coming through Silver Creek next week. We could. That is, if you were willing, we could be married." Natalie stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Married to you?" He winced slightly. "I realize it's sudden and perhaps unwelcome, but as my wife, you'd be legally beyond your father's control. No court would force a married woman back to her father's house. You would marry me just to protect me." The idea seemed absurd, yet strangely moving. "Not just to protect you, Natalie." His voice dropped lower and he reached for her hand. "These past weeks, I've come to care for you. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." "Jackson, let me finish, please." His fingers tightened around hers. "I'm not offering a marriage of convenience, though it would certainly serve that purpose. I'm offering a real marriage in time, if you could ever see me as more than a temporary protector." Natalie looked at their joined hands, her mind whirling. The attraction she felt toward Jackson had been growing daily, but she'd pushed it aside, telling herself it was merely gratitude or the natural result of their isolation together. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "After running from one marriage to leap into another seems reckless." He supplied with a small smile. "Perhaps, but there's a difference. You'd be choosing this marriage freely, and I would never seek to own or control you. Your pride, your independence, they're part of why I've grown to care for you." Before she could respond, distant hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Jackson was on his feet instantly, his expression changing from vulnerable to alert in a heartbeat. "Riders," he said tersely. "Coming up the trail, we need to go." They packed quickly, mounted their horses, and Jackson led them through a different path down the mountain, staying within the trees. By the time they reached the ranch house, the sun had fully set and lanterns blazed in the windows. Mrs. Hathaway met them at the door, her normally composed face tight with worry. "Mr. Worthington is here," she whispered, "with your father, Miss O'Hara, and 2 other men." Natalie's blood turned to ice. "How did they find me?" "Someone in town must have talked," Jackson said grimly. "Natalie, go upstairs. Lock the door and don't come out until I call for you." "I won't hide," she protested, lifting her chin. "I'm not a child, and I won't cower while men decide my fate." Jackson looked as though he might argue, then nodded once. "Very well, but let me do the talking first." They entered the house together, Jackson slightly ahead. In the study stood 4 men, Natalie's father, red-faced with anger, Harold Worthington, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line, and 2 strangers who had the hard look of hired guns. "Natalie," her father exploded upon seeing her. "You ungrateful, foolish girl. Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" "Us," Natalie replied coolly. "I wasn't aware that my absence affected Mr. Worthington so deeply, considering we've exchanged perhaps 20 words in all our acquaintance." "Your impertinence hasn't improved, I see," Worthington sneered. "Still too proud by half." Jackson stepped forward, his posture relaxed but somehow radiating danger. "Gentlemen, you're trespassing on private property. State your business and be on your way." Natalie's father drew himself up. "I've come for my daughter, Grayson. She's been promised in marriage to Mr. Worthington here. The ceremony is in 3 days' time." "Is that so?" Jackson's voice remained calm. "And does your daughter consent to this marriage?" "Her consent is irrelevant," Worthington interjected. "She's underage and subject to her father's authority." "I'm 20 years old," Natalie countered. "Hardly a child." "Under 21, her father snapped. "Still legally under my guardianship. Now collect your things, Natalie, we're leaving." Jackson moved to stand beside Natalie, his shoulder touching hers in silent support. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. O'Hara. You can't keep her here against my will," her father sputtered. "That's kidnapping." "I'm not keeping her against her will," Jackson replied. "I'm keeping her against yours. There's a difference." Worthington stepped forward, his face mottling with anger. "See here, Grayson, this is a family matter that doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does concern me." Jackson's voice remained level. "You see, Natalie and I are engaged to be married." The pronouncement landed like a thunderbolt in the room. Natalie felt her eyes widen but managed to keep her expression otherwise neutral. "That's preposterous," her father exploded. "You've known her, what, a few weeks?" 3 weeks and 4 days, Jackson confirmed, slipping his hand into Natalie's. "Sometimes, Mr. O'Hara, that's all it takes to recognize what truly matters." Worthington's laugh was ugly. "This is obviously a ruse. The girl ran away to avoid her obligations. Now she's manipulated this fool into protecting her." Jackson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're welcome to your opinion, Mr. Worthington, but the facts remain. Natalie has accepted my proposal, and we intend to marry next week when Judge Parker comes through Silver Creek." "I forbid it." Natalie's father roared. "You have no authority to forbid anything," Jackson replied. "Not here on my land." One of the hired guns moved his hand toward his holster. In a flash, Jackson had his own revolver drawn and leveled. "I wouldn't," he advised quietly. "This is my home, gentlemen. I know every creaking board, every shadow. You don't want to test me here." Tense silence filled the room. Finally, Natalie's father stepped back. "This isn't over, Grayson. I'll get a court order if I have to." "By all means," Jackson replied, "but by the time you do, we'll be legally married. Now, I believe it's time for you to leave." The standoff lasted another full minute before the 4 men reluctantly departed, muttering threats and promises of legal action. Jackson escorted them outside, returning only after their horses' hoofbeats faded into the distance. Natalie stood where he'd left her, her mind still processing the events. "Did you mean it?" she asked when he returned. "About us getting married next week," Jackson ran a hand through his hair. "I meant what I said about wanting to marry you. The timing was expedited by circumstances." "They'll be back," Natalie said softly. "My father doesn't give up easily. Neither do I." Jackson crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "Natalie, I won't force you into another unwanted marriage. If you don't want this, don't want me, I'll find another way to protect you." Natalie looked up at him, this man who had taken her in, given her purpose, treated her as an equal when others saw only a rebellious daughter or a potential possession. In his eyes, she saw not just desire but genuine respect. "They call me too proud," she said softly. "All my life it's been thrown at me like an accusation." "Your pride is your strength," Jackson replied. "It's what brought you to me. How could I not cherish that?" Something warm unfurled in her chest. "Say that again," his brow furrowed. "Which part?" "About my pride." Jackson's expression softened, and he reached up to touch her cheek. "Your pride, Natalie O'Hara, is my joy. Every day you stand tall, speak your mind, and refuse to diminish yourself for others. Comfort makes me admire you more." The words unlocked something inside her. Natalie rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his, her first kiss, freely given. Jackson responded gently at first, then with growing passion as she wrapped her arms around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Natalie smiled. "Yes, yes," Jackson repeated, his voice husky. "Yes, I'll marry you, not just to escape my father or Mr. Worthington, but because I've fallen in love with you, Jackson Grayson, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." His answering smile was radiant. "I love you too, my proud, beautiful Natalie." They were married the following week, just as planned. Judge Parker performed the ceremony in the newly completed schoolhouse, with the ranch hands and their families as witnesses. Natalie wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Hathaway had helped her make, with wildflowers from the mountain meadow in her hair. True to Jackson's prediction, Natalie's father attempted legal intervention but arrived too late. As a legally wedded wife, Natalie was beyond his control. After a final confrontation during which Jackson calmly informed Mr. O'Hara that he was welcome to visit his daughter, but only on her terms, the defeated father and his would-be son-in-law returned to redemption. The school opened 2 weeks later, with 15 eager students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Natalie discovered she had a natural gift for teaching, infusing her lessons with the same passion and independence that had once been deemed inappropriate. In the evenings, she would return to the main house, now truly her home, where Jackson waited. Sometimes they would read Shakespeare aloud, taking turns with the parts. Other times they would simply talk late into the night, planning for the future of the ranch, the school, their life together. Winter came, blanketing the valley in snow. On Christmas Eve, before a roaring fire, Jackson presented Natalie with 2 gifts, a leather-bound journal for her writing and a deed to the schoolhouse and surrounding acre of land, registered in her name alone. "Your own property," he explained. "As you once dreamed of." Tears filled her eyes as she accepted the documents. "I never thought it possible." "That's because you hadn't met someone who saw your pride as the gift it is," he replied, drawing her close. Spring brought new growth to the land and news that their family would be expanding. When their daughter was born the following winter, with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit, they named her Elizabeth Pride Grayson. "A bit unconventional for a middle name," the visiting pastor remarked when she was christened. "My wife and I," Jackson replied with a smile at Natalie, "have never been overly concerned with convention." As the years passed, the Rocking J Ranch prospered. The school expanded to include a small library funded by the successful cattle operation. 2 more children joined the family, a son named William and another daughter called Grace. Natalie's father eventually reconciled with them, becoming a doting grandfather who barely resembled the controlling man of earlier years. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson took Natalie back to the mountain meadow where he had first proposed. They picnicked among the wildflowers, watching their children play nearby. "Any regrets?" he asked, stroking her hair as she leaned against his shoulder. Natalie smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, a desperate flight from one marriage into the arms of a love she could never have imagined. "Only that I wasted so many years believing that my pride was a fault to be corrected," she answered. "When all along I just needed to find the man who would see it as his joy." Jackson kissed her then, still with the same passion as their first kiss a decade earlier. "Your pride, my joy," he whispered against her lips. "Always and forever, Natalie Grayson." Above them, the Colorado sky stretched endless and blue, a perfect canopy for a love born of courage, nurtured by respect, and strengthened by the very quality the world had once tried to diminish in her. Too proud, perhaps, but in Jackson's eyes exactly as she was meant to be.